Story 1. I once got home at about 3 a.m. and parked my car in my parking spot about 2 blocks from my apartment. I was walking home, alone on the street, except for one girl who was ahead of me on the sidewalk. I guess she felt uncomfortable, so she started running, but she was a slow runner. I kept walking at the same speed, which was not particularly fast. Apparently, we were neighbors, because she ran all the way to my apartment building and ran inside, slamming the door to the elevator room behind her. I felt kind of bad, so I decided to take the stairs. I lived on the second floor anyway. Turns out, we lived on the same floor, and the elevator opened up right as I was walking out of the stairwell. Did my best not to make eye contact, and walked away from her to my apartment. She was clearly panicking though. Always wondered what I should have done differently. I feel like if I had called out to her to let her know I wasn't an abuser, that wouldn't have helped. Story 2. Because I was trying to be a hospitable host. My brother has some people over, 3 women from work. Would you like some more wine? Did you eat enough? Let me take that plate for you. One of them thought I was a little too eager to have company over, and that I drugged the wine, so she would dump it when I wasn't around. Okay, couple of things. That's just a waste of good wine. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. I'd be a creep either way, because if I backed off, I'd be seen as the creep in the corner not saying anything. And lastly, oh honey, if I was going to drug anyone here, trust me, it wouldn't be you. Get over yourself. You're the fuggliest one here by a mile. Oh, and another commenter jogged my memory of this gym. My boss at my last job banned smoking on the property, so I'd go to the gas station next door to smoke. The gas station attendant called the police and told them I was looking at little girls. There's not a playground in sight. There's not a daycare in sight. The nearest school is at least 5 miles away. But sure, I was looking at little girls. The cops knew it was a fake call, but they had to show up at my job and ask anyway. Story 3. Many years ago, I picked up one of the kids from grade school, and he wanted to play at the park. I didn't have to immediately get back to work, so I took him. I was dressed business casual, a pair of dress pants and a nice button-down. I had 0 issues. One of the random moms actually walked up to me and said how nice it was to see a father helping out. About a month later, I was working from home, not common for that job. I picked up the kid and he wanted to go to the park. This time I was in a pair of shorts and a random t-shirt, all clean and newish. Plain colors, no graphics or writing. The same woman walked up to me and she proceeded to lay into me. Why are you here? Do you even have a kid? Which kid is yours? It's creepy when men stare at kids. You need to leave or I'm going to call the cops. She had some very unique features and hair, so I recognized her as the prior woman. I glared at her and proceeded to call her out on her crap. I explained our last interaction when I was dressed business casual and how she told me how it was nice to see a father engaged with their kid's life. And now she's being a complete bee because I'm not a dressed-up business professional. She completely ignored me and continued to raise her voice, and a few other mothers came over to see what was up, and they immediately joined in. I got called a creep. They insisted I liked children, and they called the cops. Cops showed up, and they started to question what was going on. The woman I was initially interacting with started telling them I was a creep and watching the kids, and that I didn't even have a child. The cops were pretty good about things, and then my kid ran up to me because cops have guns, and being a typical boy, shiny. The woman tried to grab my kid while saying, "Don't go near him." And when I blurted out, "Don't touch my kid," and he pulled away from her, the expression was knowing she had messed up. The cops glared at her, started to pull her away to question her further, and I could hear some of their conversation. They dug into her previous statements. I thought you said he didn't have kids. The other women quickly tried to divert themselves from her. I explained to the cops that I literally lived one street over, about 300 yards away. Cops left, said I wasn't doing anything wrong. I heard them talking to her about wasting the police's time, making false police reports, and everything was done. I took the kid to the park every day for the next week. I made sure that mother knew I was there, and that I would continue to be there. She stopped showing up, and I took that as a win. I was pretty pissed about the whole thing, but now I look back on it, and I just feel sorry for her, that she has that much internal fear that a man taking his kid to the park invokes that type of reaction. Story 4. Teacher here. Went to a retail store and was standing in line. There was an 8th or ninth grader a few people ahead of me paying for school supplies with coins, and she had to make a decision of what to keep and what to put away because she didn't have enough money. I walked up and said I would pay because I taught at a local school. I still had my badge on. The girl was happy and said thank you, but the looks the cashier and other people gave me in line were like daggers. I heard murmurs about how it was weird, and the cashier said nothing to me when she rang me out. I was mad at first, but I'd do it again. If kids can't afford what they need to not fall behind, I don't care what random people think of me. Story 5. A new coworker, new at the time this happened, this was like 6 years ago now, was telling me that she would love to meet a guy like me, then asked if I wanted to see her after work that night. I told her yes, and she was shocked, and then told me that she had plans to babysit that night. She told our boss that she didn't feel comfortable working with me anymore, and that I kept asking her out. She was transferred the next day, and I had to meet with my boss and my boss's boss to explain it. They'd known me for a long time and seemed to believe what I told them, but it was still an incredibly uncomfortable and honestly frightening scenario that could have easily spun out of control against me. So, not exactly the question asked because the label didn't seem to stick, but it still really threw me off and made me really anxious for a long time. That kind of thing freaks me out so much. That people can just create situations that could potentially cause a lot of harm over seemingly nothing. So, in a way, labeled a creep for saying yes to a woman who asked me out. Story 6. In middle school, during one of the random auditorium presentations, we were shuffled into the seats. Chances are, if your school has an auditorium, you'll know how they did it. No choice of seat, no choice of seat neighbors. Fill in every single available seat in order with no spaces. Well, I was lined up behind one of the popular girls, and that meant I was going to sit next to her. I couldn't care less. She felt otherwise. We sit, and every few seconds she turns to me and goes, a little louder each time. I've ignored her every single time, staring straight ahead at whatever PSA bullshit the school had cooked up. Out of my peripheral vision, I can see that she's comically scooting all the way over to her right, practically climbing on top of her friend while they whisper to each other. Suffering through that should have been the end of it, but as it turns out, she made up a bunch of crap about me, grinning at her, smelling her, saying I wanted to touch her, stopping just short of claiming I actually assaulted her. She's one of the most popular kids, so of course it becomes a thing where everybody that hears it believes it. I'm a short, slightly chubby kid that's quiet and keeps to himself, so of course I'm a creep, obviously. Luckily, 9/11 happened like a month later, and everyone forgot about it. Story 7. I was a professional touring musician. I was on a flight, which I often was, and this 9 or 10-year-old girl was in the seat next to me flying alone, and she had a violin with her. She initiated a conversation with me because she saw me put my guitar in the overhead position. She asked me what kind of guitar I played, etc. We had a nice conversation about composers we like, and she was telling me about a piece she was composing herself. Really cool kid. This goes on for about 10 minutes, and the flight attendant comes by and tells the girl if she wants to, she can sit up front in first class. The kid actually looked at me like, "What do I do?" I was like, "Wow, that's awesome, go." Now keep in mind, I'm not a long hair, freaky looking music type. I'm totally clean cut and normal. Anyway, a few minutes later, another flight attendant goes over, and I hear her ask the one that moved the girl why, and I hear her say she didn't feel comfortable with that man talking to her. I was really hurt. I mean, I get it, people are nuts, and you never know, but still, it really bothered me. Story 8. In my freshman year, my high school accused me of being a predator for showing signs of sexual harassment. What did I do? A girl was talking down about herself during math period. When the bell rang, I caught up to her and told her, "Hey, just want you to know that you're beautiful, and all the stuff you said about yourself isn't true. You're amazing, and I hope things get better." Apparently, the substitute teacher heard me say this and reported it to the main office. 2 days later, I'm called into the dean's office and was told that calling a girl you don't know beautiful or pretty is sexual harassment, and that it's a sign that I'm a sexual predator. Thankfully, it didn't go any further because the social workers said they would interview other female students I'm seen with most often, and they all stood up for me or were confused why they would ask that. Oh, but it still pisses me off when I remember it. Story 9. Standing quietly behind someone in a grocery store, reading a book on my phone, and listening to my music in my earbuds. She eventually taps my arm and says, "You're not fooling anybody, so stop looking at me." Apparently, asking why I was staring at her was the wrong thing to ask, and she went off on me. Fortunately, the cashier and the two older ladies stepped up for me. Shout out for the one that said, "No, he's got a point. Why would anyone waste a second glance on you? You're so bland. You're just background, like furniture in a chip shop." Which I don't truly get, but it sent her into a nuclear reaction before a manager asked her to leave. Story 10. I mentioned to a lady that I used to stop and sit for a bit by this one park when I would go for walks. There were some slides and swings on the other side of the park, so she decided I was a creepy. I had already said that I went for walks late, like 11 p.m. or even later. So, because I sometimes sat on a bench 200 feet from a swing, hours after anyone had finished using it, and outside the fence and facing away from it anyhow, she said she would call the cops on me if she ever saw me do that. Okie dokie then. Story 11. Thought my eyes were too big. Didn't like how I crossed my legs. Thought I was too quiet. I asked what kind of web browser someone used. I tried to join an existing conversation between several people I already knew. Because I like to eat by myself. And on and on and on. If the word can be used to describe things like murder and SA, and also all of the above, then it's a junk bin concept that doesn't really mean anything and needs to be retired. Story 12. Took my younger brother to a trampoline park. I'm in my 20s and he's 8. He accidentally jumped near one of the younger kids and they started crying. This kid's mother was nowhere near him and I went over to ask if he needed any help, if he was okay, and where his parents or guardian was. He was very distraught and didn't answer, but when his mom finally did show up, she gave me this look that just screamed, "Get away from my child," and snapped at me saying, "I can handle it." Mind you, she didn't show up for at least a minute while this kid was screaming, and I was trying to find who this kid's guardian was. Look, I totally understand stranger danger as a young child and being careful, and I know parents can be protective of their children. However, I was leaning down next to him with my younger brother with me, making sure he was okay. If I was a woman, this probably would have gone very differently. It is what it is, I guess. Story 13. I worked in fighter jets. A girl came out to talk to the pilot during an engine running refuel, and she had no business being near it, and didn't know the safety zones. She walked up and looked directly into the running engine. I know there isn't enough pull to suck her up at idle, but it can suck the pins out of her arm pin holder for sure. So I ran up, grabbed her by the jacket on her shoulders, and threw her behind me. She absolutely flew and fell on her face. I saved her from wrecking a multi-million-dollar engine at best, her life at worst, all because she was flirting with the pilot. How do I know? I had a 3-sided comm cord and heard the whole thing. She called me a creep for it and tried to get me in trouble. Story 14. Happened when I was living with my roommates. My bedroom was just off the kitchen, and my computer desk was directly across from my floor, facing away. I'm sitting there one day with my door open, and I hear a noise, and when I turn around, one of my roommate's friends is there in a bikini. We had a hot tub. We make eye contact, and I return to what I'm doing. No words, no lingering glances, no staring. A simple look of, "Oh, there's a person," without even any acknowledgement apart from seeing each other. I found out later that the girl told all my roommates I made her uncomfortable enough to never come back by looking at her. Now, I've had people say some mean crap about me, but I've genuinely never been more insulted in my life. Story 15. I'm not a man, but I witnessed this firsthand. I was in the office talking to my supervisor, who had the habit of watching every football or basketball game on his phone that he'd have set up on his desk so it was seated in front of a window that looked into the parking lot. One of the workers was out in the parking lot doing whatever and thought our supervisor was watching him with his hands going up and down, which he definitely wasn't because he had the game on loud in the office and we could all hear it, and he was typing on his keyboard. Since we were union, he filed a complaint and it was a whole mess. We knew this worker was a troublemaker because of what other locations he was at have said, but he was just a POS who thought he was cool. Our supervisor got suspended and everything. I truly try not to judge books by their covers, but this dude was ugly and he smelled bad. Always chewed Copenhagen, and yes, he lived in a trailer. Story 16. I was about 15 at a house party. I once helped an extremely drunk girl the same age as me get picked up safely by her parents. Only people thought I was trying to sleep with her and get her to come home with me, so they wouldn't let us leave the house together. I had to ring her dad to come into the house to get her, and I helped them out to the car. Her friends were more concerned that they thought I was trying to sleep with her than the actual well-being of their friend. They were useless. Anyway, even though the girl in question told everyone to stop and couldn't stick up for me any more than she did, I was known as a creep for years. It destroyed my self-confidence at the time, and I didn't go out again in that manner until I was almost 20. Story 17. Hanging out with my best friend, a girl, a lot. Ended up at a party with her, and another girl was saying to another person there how creepy I am for following my friend around all the time. I was just kind of like, the f*** in my head, and was gonna let it go. But my friend also heard this, and called her out, and was like, he isn't. He's my best friend and we hang out a lot. Or something along those lines. I didn't really care, but it was nice that she backed me up. Oddly enough, months later, I ended up very close with the girl who called me creepy, and we're good friends now. Story 18. This one is a bit different, but a girl I was seeing admitted to having a really big daddy kink, and she wanted to explore it. But I'm talking like full-blown incest. I found it a little weird, but I didn't want to embarrass her, especially after she worked up the courage to share it. We talked about it, and she explained what turned her on about it, and we agreed to do a little roleplay. The day came, and we did our thing, and despite being a little weirded out by it, I tried my best to get into it, because I wanted her to enjoy it. Basically, I was trying to be as supportive as I could, and leaned into the scenario, which she seemed to really enjoy at the time. A few days later, however, she started being really short with me and kept making up excuses to not hang out. Eventually, when I asked her what was going on, she said I was a little too into the fantasy, and it creeped her out and made her wary. Story 19. I'm an average 30-ish-year-old male. I'm pretty clean cut, and most would consider me conventionally attractive. Well, I used to park in a nice neighborhood on the outskirts of downtown Seattle, then take the bus into town 2 miles away. I got back to my car one day and my battery was dead. I had jumper cables and my hood up ready to go, and I approached this lady who I've seen many times around her house in the morning over the 4+ years I've parked there, and asked her very nicely if she could help me jump my car. She said, "I don't have jumper cables." And I said, "Oh, no problem, I have some." Then she said, "Well, I can't. I just can't." And I said, "Well, it would be really easy because your car is already facing mine, and you can just pull up and then she blurted out, "I just can't, you creep, stop bothering me or I'll call the cops." So I was like, whoa, okay, no problem, not necessary at all. So I just called an Uber and came back with my wife later that night to jump the car. It honestly felt really weird and dirty to be called that, when I genuinely had good intentions and thought she might be neighborly.